All right, I'm Ryan Wild. I'm the director of recruiting here at Alliance Careers. For anybody who may come across this, we hope it serves as a really useful tool for those of you kind of in the midst of the transition process, or at least considering one getting out of the military. It's not the easiest thing to do. A lot of chatter out there, very useful stuff on LinkedIn, a lot of resources to help. Alliance Careers is one of those. I'm here with Dylan Allen today, kind of a recent graduate, if you will, came through the program with us back in the spring, summer of this year as he was prosecuting his own transition, attended our June hiring event and really kind of knocked it out of the park and has a unique story to tell. Not quite our quote unquote traditional candidate, not that there's any one way to do this, or any one way that we do it, but we found him on kind of short notice compared to what we normally do, and he performed admirably, right? And I think small credit to me, more to him. I kind of saw what was there when I first talked to him, and it was part of the reason that we really wanted to do this with him. So, Dylan, thanks for joining us today. It's great to have you. Dylan is a West Point graduate, civil engineer major. Class of 18, branched into the Army engineer branch, and got to do some pretty cool things on staff along the way. Was preparing for a variety of different schools. Had some injury setbacks that didn't necessarily allow him to get down and do some of the leadership iterations that he was really spending a couple of years preparing for to that point, and that typically we look for here at Alliance, right, in terms of that leadership pedigree, to be able to take folks like that and put them in corporate developmental tracks. But again, a few minutes talking to Dylan the first time, I had a sense that something was there where maybe those things didn't quite matter as much, right? And that's part of the vetting process. It's not just a paper drill. It's making sure that we get to know the person as well. Got to know Dylan over a couple conversations. Ended up kind of changing how he decided to do things in this sort of pivotal career shift. And from there, I'll turn it over to you, Dylan, to start setting the stage on sort of where you were at in this transition process right around the time I came along.
For sure, Ryan. Well, I appreciate you having me on, and I'm always happy to sit down with you guys at Alliance here. You all have been great to me, just to start off. But I would say when you first contacted me, I was in the middle of the med board process. I was going through the SFL tap thing that everybody else does, getting out of the military, and my plan at the time was really to go back to graduate school, and I think I was pretty dead set on it. You kind of got that vibe too when we first talked.
Yep.
And that was really the plan. I wanted to go back and get my civil engineering graduate degree because I thought that would be the best way to be more marketable in the job world on the outside. And I was going to go back to UVA and do that. And so when you contacted me, I was a little like, I don't know, because I didn't know anything about Alliance. And I kind of assumed that Alliance is very similar to a lot of other recruiting agencies that you see when you get contacted through LinkedIn or something like that.
Sure.
But my mindset was pretty well set on the graduate program, I would say, at that point.
Yeah. Okay. So the plan, I guess, was to kind of leverage it. And how long is that graduate program again?
It was a 1-year program. Yeah.
Okay. So it's, I guess, we've talked before, obviously. You had described it to me at that point as sort of dusting off maybe what you had learned at West Point. For anybody who doesn't know, the Army engineer branch doesn't necessarily get into some of the intricacies in terms of the STEM part of engineering, right? There's a lot of there's some construction aspect, right? There's also finding IEDs and moving some dirt around. So it's not quite as heavy on the math and science in that regard, at least. But either way, you felt like, hey, I need to kind of go maybe to a certain degree recertify on this, and then kind of prepare me for a career specifically in engineering. And this is a great networking opportunity to do just that as well.
That's exactly right. Yeah, I was going to utilize the obviously the networking aspect of UVA, where I planned on going,
Sure,
as well. Because again, coming out of the military, you don't necessarily always have a strong network of people on the outside. You have everybody kind of you have friends within your class group who all get out at the same time, but you don't necessarily have that group on the outside who. So
sure,
that was also kind of my plan there as a lead into to a job on the outside, UVA.
Which would have been a great way to do it, I think. For anybody who is thinking about this or in the midst of it, if you haven't already come to this conclusion or heard it somewhere else, network is the one thing that really can make or break you more than any other thing, right? The certifications, the additional education, those are all helpful. They may stand out on a resume as long as that resume actually gets noticed by somebody. And a lot of that comes down to who you know, right? So I think, having the networking capability is really important throughout this thing, and something that anybody going through a transition or any career shift at any point in their life really wants to pay specific attention to. So, okay, so that was the plan. What were your concerns, right, as you were kind of coming into this thing? I mean, what if there was anything keeping you up at night? What do you think that looked like?
Yeah, I would say I didn't have a whole lot of concerns. I felt like I had a pretty good plan about going back to school, but I would
Sure.
say the biggest concern was not necessarily the plan. It was whether I'd be marketable or not coming out of the military. So you kind of touched on it already. A lot of the jobs that I was looking at and looking up, just doing some research, they're asking for 5 years of experience in the field. They're asking for a,
Yep.
a PE degree or PE certification and stuff that I didn't have coming out of the military. And so that was probably the biggest worry. Is I knew what field I wanted to go into, but I didn't feel like I was qualified to, get some of the jobs that I wanted to pursue.
Yep.
And I would say my whole mindset at that point was, yes, I'm going to go back to grad school at UVA. I'm gonna get that 1 year engineering. I think it was infrastructure engineering is what I was
Yep.
going to pursue there.
Yeah, I remember you
And
telling me
then
that.
I would be more marketable and really brush up on a lot of my hard skills that I had kind of missed when I was in the military for 3 years. I hadn't used a lot of those things that I had learned back at West Point.
Sure.
So I really wanted to go back and brush up on that so I could feel comfortable and I would feel that I was going to be competitive when I did end up applying for jobs on the outside.
Absolutely. Right. So that was one way to go. And I think it would have been a good one. The only thing I really pointed out, I think, when we started our conversations, which is what we'll shift to next, is, this keeps you out of the workforce a little bit longer, right? It wouldn't have been the end of the world at all, especially not with a good network. And UVA's got a very top tier engineering program in general. So you would have been connected with some great companies and roles as a result. However, we started talking, right, and you started listening, and my proposition, I guess, was, well, what if there's an alternative to this? What if we have a great network here at Alliance as well, and we've got a program that you didn't necessarily get to experience the full suite of, but still, and you'll speak to this soon. I think you still got a lot of it, and I think what you found to be fairly helpful in terms of assessing different career fields, right? Technical leadership being one of those, and obviously something that you kind of we helped you find your way into regardless. But it was kind of a, hey, what if we can help you make this transition now? What if we can vault you in there now? And that, we've got some of these engineering management opportunities pretty routinely, at least, similar to what you'd probably find on the backside of UVA's engineering management, program. So tell me about what started to change as you and I kind of got deeper in this discussion over the course of several calls.
Yeah, well, I would say initially I kind of touched on it. You originally contacted me through LinkedIn, and I was a little hesitant at first. I didn't know a whole lot about Alliance,
Sure.
and you're able to kind of, you're very convincing on the phone. You're able to kind of lay out some different aspects that maybe I didn't think about in terms of, just statistics about leadership, about leaders in the workforce and good companies, and how a graduate degree does not necessarily make for a good leader in the workforce. And so that kind of got me thinking and everything like that. I had touched on, I didn't know a whole lot about Alliance. So I started to do some research on Alliance myself, and really found, when I looked at your website, the letter that your CEO, John Todd, wrote and kind of laid out the different values that Alliance has and what they look for in different companies and how they pair up candidates with those companies,
Yep.
was huge for me, because I was looking at that and I was like, oh man, I want job satisfaction. I want growth. I want
Right.
I want to have a great career on the outside and everything like that. So I was looking for more of a career than a job. And I think Alliance, looking at their website and kind of seeing the selectiveness of the program and how they selected the companies that they pair you up with,
Sure.
really is what changed my mindset and was able to be. And I was much more comfortable at that point being like, oh yeah, I can't pass up on this opportunity that you guys are offering at that point. And I think that plus obviously going in and seeing the reviews that the other alliance team or other alliance candidates had in the past as well, and their experience was also massive. So I think a big part of it was absolutely just doing some of my own research, obviously talking to you as well.
Sure.
But that I think really ultimately changed my mindset from the grad school to this is an opportunity I can't pass up right now.
Okay. So we do the exploration. I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to at least kind of walk you through some of that, right? I think outside perspectives are typically helpful, hopefully, at least. And ultimately the decision is yours to be made. But I think I was kind of able to at least point out some things that maybe you just hadn't had a reason to consider before. And ultimately, you went and checked everything out and said, "Hey, this kind of does align well with what I think I want to do next." Right? Maybe there are alternative means to getting to this thing, and even a little bit quicker. So, the switch flips. You make the decision to do this with us, and again, maybe not our most traditional approach, but you didn't have a ton of time before a conference. We still had a few weeks available to us, but normally we like it to be a few months if we can. You made the most of it though. You jumped in with both feet. So how was your Alliance experience, leading up to the conference?
Yeah, I would say in one sentence, it was very fast paced. I had about 2.5 weeks from the time I did my interview with you and John
Right.
Todd for the whole selection process to
Yep.
when the conference actually started. But I would say that in that 2.5 weeks, there was nothing that I felt unprepared for going into the conference. So
Yeah.
during that time frame, obviously had the selection interviews, but then I sat down with with John Zornick,
Mm-hmm.
and we went through a lot of the different classes in that short span of time. So I was able to kind of clear space in my schedule to sit down, go through those classes, go through your website on my own, and or the candidate hub on my own, and pick out how to make my resume better, how to interview on a virtual environment, because a lot
Right.
of times we don't sit to, it's not typical for an interview necessarily, more so now than it was. But there are different strategies when you're interviewing in a virtual environment versus in person that I
Sure.
really hadn't considered before. So preparing in that aspect of it.
I had
And
to
then
work on my
also
lighting this morning just to do this. So yeah.
exactly, exactly. And then stuff like obviously the mock interviews too were huge. So I had mentioned I hadn't interviewed before. Probably West Point was a lot before West Point was the last
17
time I
years
actually
old,
interviewed
something
for
like that.
anything.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, 17 years old. It's the last time I interviewed, and you don't think about everything that goes into an interview that can help you.
Sure.
And yeah, and also the questions that are going to be asked and the style of interview
Mm-hmm.
that's going to be going on as well. So um, with the telephonic mock interviews, it was fantastic because it was more of a coaching moment for me where I was able to
Right.
answer the questions and then get feedback immediately after each question I answered, which was good for me. I could write that down. I could prep and figure out what I did right, figure out what I did wrong, and what I need to repeat for the actual interview for the conference. And then
Sure.
the 2 days prior to the conference, we had the virtual mock interviews, like where
Mm-hmm.
um, and I would say those were also extremely helpful because going in, I had no idea how that would be kind of set up. And so
Yep.
my first interview was very, open, it was with an alliance teammate, very open, very, a lot of visual feedback going on and everything like that in terms of the
Right.
questions. And they were the standard questions that you kind of expect to be asked in the interview. And so I was like, okay, that went well. That was great. And then my next one, also with an alliance teammate, was much more stoic. There wasn't as much, feedback going on. And I was like, oh gosh, I don't know how I did here.
Right.
The questions are a little different. And really what I found is I didn't do any worse than I did in the other one. It's just the manner of the interview, really.
Different
And
styles. Yeah.
exactly. And so I think that was huge going into the conference because I had interviews that went both ways. And so I felt confident coming out and going into interviews that had different kinds of interviewers and different styles. So I
Yeah.
think that was probably those were probably the best preparation for me going into the hiring conference.
No, it's great. We have candidates, and you did one of these. Do a post conference survey telling us how we did. Right. It's a Alliance's report card, and a lot of modifications we've made to this program over the 18 plus years we've been at it have largely come from candidate feedback on what could have been done differently or better, or stay the course on this because it works really well. Bar none, the most, I think, resonating and frequent positive feedback that we get on everything that happened leading into a conference is the mock interview process, because interviews are occasionally kind of formula driven, depending on certain companies, but a lot of times it's personality driven, right? So you can't read too much into what you are or are not getting back from the person across the table from you or on the other side of a computer screen in this case. And so it's good to kind of get some of those, right? We will have people who nailed interviews, but they didn't feel like they did in the moment because somebody was kind of stoic and just didn't give them a whole lot to go off of, and other folks who thought they went out there and crushed it, and they just happened to be talking to a very friendly, gregarious person and they wanted to go in a different direction. So you don't want to pin all your hopes and dreams to reading something into it too much, at least. So all right, so prep was great, and I'm glad, and a lot of that comes down to the candidate too. You really made the most of it, and this program is self-paced, and we obviously really strongly encourage you guys to do a lot of these things to prepare for this moment and to burn some midnight oil if you need to, because it's going to make a big difference. But not everybody necessarily does that. You did, and I feel like you got a lot out of it. So you had a great conference. Results were pretty impressive. Tell me more about the conference itself, and how you felt about your lineup and how you feel like you did, and just that 2 or 3 days of a lot of interviewing and what that experience was like.
Yeah, going from not having interviewed and since I was 17 to 10 interviews in 2 days, it was a lot, but I didn't feel like I was rushed through anything. I felt prepared for each interview that I went into. I think a lot of that kind of goes back to what you said. Alliance prepares you, but I also did some preparation on my end too.
Yeah.
That really helped me. Excuse me, going into the conference. The conference itself, it was virtual for me. I'm sure that I know in the past that's not always the case, but I thought it went great overall. I specifically liked how you had very good communication both before and following up after each interview that you had, where I would be checking in with you so I knew everything was good to go before I sat down. Then also the feedback for you after each interview as well, to kind of give a rating almost of how well you did. But I would say I felt really good going into each interview and then also coming out of the conference. But obviously you don't necessarily know, because you could say, like you had mentioned, you have someone who's very gregarious who you think, oh yeah, I killed that interview, but they want to go in a different direction. So there's always that kind of in the back of your mind.
Yeah.
But I would certainly say that when I got that call from John Todd a couple days after, kind of laying out how the conference went for me, I was pretty stoked about that. That was a great phone call to kind of get that reassurance that I did pretty well and had a lot of companies interested in me.
Yeah. What does pretty well mean in this case, Dylan?
Well, I had 10 interviews, and of those 10 companies, they all had interest in me.
Every single one of them. Yeah, I thought that was worth pointing out. So I appreciate your modesty, but when you go 10 for 10, that's something to brag about a little bit, right? So
I try not to, but it did make me feel good. I'll tell you that. I felt really good after that.
Well, this whole thing's about confidence, right? So part of the reason, we're a selective organization, there's a lot of different reasons behind that, but part of what we're trying to project when we're talking to a candidate is, how do we think their conference experience could go, right? Now, a lot of candidates we are talking to months, if not a year, even year plus out from transitioning. The idea is, if we sort of stick to these platonic ideals of an A+ candidate and then the A+ companies that we, have fostered relationships with over the years to work with as well, then there's going to be a lot of good matches to be made regardless of the conference. So we don't exactly know what the mix will be when we're talking to a given candidate, but we have to be reasonably certain that they've got everything that they need, and that we who they are, 90% of an alliance candidate being just kind of the foundations of that person and everything they've chosen to do with their life so far. The other 10% is what we can provide and invest in them in terms of education and preparation, and then we want to make sure that we're fairly confident they're going to have a great conference experience when they get there. And if for some reason that doesn't seem like it could be the case, and there's a million different variables that would impact that, maybe we don't select somebody because we're not helping them if we put them in the same situation that we put you in, but with much different results. Because now your first step out into potentially the real world, if you don't win a bunch of interviews, and it kind of leaves you, okay, maybe I'm not as sure about this as I was before, but I'm right on the cusp. So, it kind of speaks towards our selectivity, what I think I saw in you proving me right, which thank you for that. I don't get to be right that often. So it was kind of nice in this case, but I mean, 10 for 10 is great, right? And that just means 10 companies expressed a strong interest in doing at least a follow-up interview with you. That's somewhat infeasible, at least all at once, right? So
Right. I
walk us.
don't think I touched on it either, Ryan.
Yeah.
In terms of the lineup of companies too that I got to sit down with as well. So I didn't know a whole lot about each of the companies that you all had kind of lined me up with, aside from the company briefings that I had before
Yep.
the conference a couple of days before. But I would say coming out of each interview, there was not a company that I did not feel confident going to work for if I ended up, selecting them. I felt great with the company. It was a very wide variety,
Right.
but all within my realm of interest too. I don't think I
Sure.
touched on that earlier, but I just kind of wanted to lay that out there too, because it was a fantastic lineup of companies that I sat down with.
No, and I'm glad you did. I mentioned, a few times just a minute ago, the selection process and selectivity and kind of what goes into that. It's a two-way street, right? When we talk to candidates, part of this is what do you want to do? And if you want to go join the FBI, you don't need me, and I can't help you. Maybe even worse, right? So that's part of the reason we have these conversations with candidates on the front end, to make sure that we understand their drives, goals, desires, and what really ticks with them. But the reality is, I think, and I know this was the case for me a long time ago, a lot of us don't know exactly what we want to do. And I would even discourage being overly specific unless you've spent years really kind of integrating yourself into a certain industry or type of business or something like that, and researched it really, really well, and know for sure, hey, that speaks to my soul. That's what I'm going to go do. But for a lot of us, that tends not to be the case, right? So there is a variety of things we could go do. And I think some of those base metrics of what's going to make me happy can be found in a lot of different places. It's not necessarily tied to a specific industry or a company name or even a title. It's the kind of team you're working on, the kind of work that you get to do, the kind of responsibility you're being given, and maybe even most importantly in this step in life, how much are they willing to develop me to make sure that I stick the landing on this, versus just kind of throwing me in there and saying, good luck. No, I'm glad you point that out, that, I'd say most of our candidates really do feel like, I remember one guy, maybe even from your conference, putting his commentary in that post-conference survey. It was like you guys were somehow reading my mind. So that's encouraging to hear, right? That we're getting that part right, far more often than not. So now again, 10 yeses. We aim for speed in this thing, right? We want companies to kind of be able to make decisions quickly, both for their sake and as much for them as for you, right? And make this a competitive process, and have hopefully a number of suitors knocking at your door, who may want to go the distance with you. So what did that follow-up process look like?
Yeah, well, kind of as you mentioned, with 10 yeses, it's not really feasible in a timely manner to sit down with all 10 of those companies. So what happened after that was Roger lined up about 2 to 3 days, maybe about half a week after the conference. I got my first follow-up interview scheduled with Roger, and so he had said it was pretty simple process. He got me in contact with the company I was going to be following up with, which happened to be in Wisconsin. I got in a plane, flew up, and the following day had my interview with that company, and it went great. Again, it was my first on-site interview with the company, and so I got a tour of the plant, got to sit down with the management team there, and the HR team for the interview, and it was fantastic. And I felt really good coming out of that follow-up interview as well. From there, Roger, while I was there, kind of scheduled another one while I was still in Wisconsin, and said, "All right, so you're going to come back. We're going to fly you back into Nashville, and then you're going to go to Fort Payne, Alabama, where I am right now, with Volcraft here." And so, having the first on-site to compare to in Wisconsin to the one I did with Volcraft, two very different styles of follow-up interviews.
Sure.
The one here at Volcraft, I really enjoyed how I was actually interviewed by the team I would be working with and leading at some point. So it was great to be able to meet them, obviously, but then also kind of pick their brain and they pick my brain to see how well we would kind of mesh as a team there. And that's not, I don't think that's typical of most interviews. Usually you're going up as opposed to, you know, with your peers in an interview setting, which was awesome.
Yeah.
And so, you know, I did that, had basically a day full of interviews with everybody here at Volcraft, to include the management teams as well.
Mhm.
And then just felt really, really good about Volcraft itself. Love the people, love the culture here, and I love the area as well. You know, if I didn't go into this conference, you know, picking and choosing, you know, where I wanted to live, but
Yep.
you know, it ended up being one of those things where if I'm splitting hairs on one decision or the other, you know, it just happened to work out really well for me.
Yeah.
But I
That's
would
part of the
say
reason we want to give you options too, right? I mean, you know,
exactly.
start with strength of opportunity, but there's some other criteria that are going to be important to you as well. So it's nice to have, you know, the ability to make some decisions based around those other things too, instead of just
For
kind of taking
sure.
what you can get in the spot.
Absolutely, absolutely. And so from the Volcraft interview, I actually had two more follow-up interviews that week, and they both were virtual. So I had one in the hotel room while I was still here in Fort Payne, and then another one that Friday when I got back.
Yeah.
And so really it is all about speed after that, because it's these companies kind of competing against each other to get you to
Right.
go to come work for them. And so then
Sure.
it was really it was really a decision making process for me.
Yeah.
So I had multiple different avenues that I could have taken following each of those follow-up interviews. And as I mentioned, I ultimately decided on Volcraft here.
Yeah.
And you know, I just couldn't pass up the area, the people, the team that I'd be working with here, and I could not be happier with the decision after the conference to come here to Volcraft.
That's fantastic. And, you know, not that many people may know this or would have a reason to, but Volcraft is a subsidiary of a much larger company called Nucor. And Nucor is just incredibly unique and very devoted to their culture, to the point where a number of case studies have been done on them over the years, and how they approach that much more flat organization than you would see in a lot of other places. And the fact that you were interviewed by your prospective team, people who would, at least in some sense, kind of be answering to you, really, I think, points to their appreciation for and utter commitment to the servant leadership attitude. That, you know, it's, you know, what do you know? How can we help you? How can you help us? Right? Is essentially kind of what that interview looks like, I think, when you're meeting the team that you could be overseeing at some point. So I think that's a pretty cool nuance that is at least fairly unique to them. And yeah, I would agree. Kind of hard to pass up what a career with that company could look like. So I know you're going to crush it for them. You're a few weeks in now. They're teaching you a lot. Drinking from the fire hose, is we like to say frequently. But it's going to be a great experience. I think it already has been for you. They're lucky to have you. So are we. So thank you for trusting us and doing this with us, and being willing to share that experience for hopefully a broader audience that again may at least glean some things from this, and, you know, kind of what to look for and things to be aware of as you go through this transition process. There's no one right way to do it, obviously, but there's a lot to consider. And making sure that we can give people a scope of those things, I think, is helpful. So thank you for your time today, Dylan. Thanks for being willing to sit with us today.
Absolutely, and a big thanks to you, Ryan, and the whole Alliance team as well. I would not be here without you all, and I can't thank you all enough as well.
Excellent. Well, thanks, Dylan.
Have a good one.